My name is Larry Connor. I go by the Lawrence John because somebody said that that's who that's what's on the birth certificate. And because I've gone by a number of different names, they say, who are you running from? And so you have to be careful with some of these things. Tonight, I want to have a little fun and share a little information with you folks. And if you've read about my background, you know that I live in Michigan again. Was born there. And but I spent half a decade keeping bees just a few miles from here, over in LaBelle. How many have been to LaBelle? Yeah, I figured you had. You have to go through there, right, to get somewhere on the other side of the state. And I was there when Flora and Ella's was a small place, a hole in the wall.
Yeah, now it's gone.
And now they got something else in there, and they got a big thing on the highway that's apparently been cloned or franchised. Except when I was there, it was not Flora and Ella's, it's Flora and Ella's. So it's like LaBelle. It was one of those two women's names that were contracted to come up with the name of the town.
You go to the old place downtown?
Yeah.
Next to the Curtis's there?
Right next to the Curtis's. So we had a program in Florida here in the 70s trying to mass produce instrumentally inseminated queen honeybees. And I really wish we had succeeded at that, because we had the technology down, we just didn't have the finances figured out. Because we were selling queens for $5.70. The cost is $25 to produce. So there was a business model plan, and I didn't have anything to say about that, Chuck Dadan. And so I want to see that, notice it, the sustainable backyard apiary with the Florida twist. Because I've been here, I've kept bees here. Now, when I kept bees here, it was before tracheomites, before small hive beetles, before varroa mites, and before Africanized honeybees. So some people say it was a lot easier then. But let me just tell you something. It wasn't easy then. Keeping bees in South Florida is always a challenge. And you have to pay attention to what's going on in nature. You have to be paying a lot of attention to what the plants are doing. Now, how many of you have checked your bees to see how the honey flow is going? How many of you have a honey flow on? What's it from? Spanish needle. That little white composite is one of the best winter nectar and pollen sources that you're going to find. It is a really, really good source. So if you're in an area with open fields where this is growing in abundance, if you're in the middle of the piney woods, it might not be so good. But Spanish needle is a very good plant. I checked out your club website. Who does your club website? Good job.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this evening. Sustainability, that's the new buzzword. Pun intended. Because we have a lot of people that want things to happen like magic. They think that if they buy a hive of bees and don't feed them and don't take care of them and leave them alone, the bees know all the answers, and they're going to take care of themselves very well, and they're going to produce lots of honey for the bees. The beekeeper won't take any honey, and everybody's happy until the bees die. Tom Seeley, Dr. Tom Seeley, has 3 books out, and he's coming out with his 4th. His 3rd book, Honeybee Democracy, where he explains how honeybees are better at politics than U.S. politicians. If you don't have this book, you should read it. I know somebody who can sell it to you. It's Amazon. So Tom Seeley did some work with it before his first book, which is called Honeybee Ecology. A great little book, and Princeton has now finally brought it back to life. And he says that in his studies, when a colony swarms, it has a 1 chance in 6 of reaching its first birthday. 1 in 6. Now, how many patients do you have that you lose 5 out of 6?
That would be bad.
So, you have to be careful when you start out with bees that you realize that this is not a done deal. So there are certain things that you need to be aware of, and we're going to talk about some of these things. Now, if you've already read this, you should see that the word or the phrase, the maintained bee colony populations, is huge. Population management. The young man that said something about George Curtis. He said the biggest problem he had in LaBelle was keeping bees strong enough, bee colonies strong enough, during the summer, because they don't have enough food coming in, populations go down. In LaBelle, the biggest honey crop during the summer was from the cabbage palm. It's both a nectar source and a pollen source. All the palms, I think, are pretty good. At least I don't know of any that you want to avoid. So the beauty of having palm trees around, and especially the native cabbage palm, and of course the palmetto is related, but that's earlier in the year, sometime in mid-spring, right? Down here?
Palmetto?
Yeah. In March, okay. So these are plants that are really good for the bees, and you can get a crop of honey. But in the summer, you have to be very careful about the colonies dwindling down, having a dearth.
We don't follow tooth and nail when they try to eradicate the melaleuca. Melaleuca was a good.
Yeah, most good honey plants are on somebody's list. I go to visit my daughter who lives in Alaska, and you can go out on the weekends and pull out white sweet clover because it's invasive in Alaska. So there you go. So sustainability. You're going to keep me on track, aren't you? We want to have something that helps us maintain our bee operation. We want to have strong colonies that maintain themselves. There are lots of definitions here. I like the Latin word, sustare, to hold up. So if you're going to hold up your bee colonies, you got to hold up that population. And you've got to know when the population normally goes down, and not because of swarming, but because of the natural cycles of the apiary and of the honey plants. Next one. So you're going to deal with some things. When I was a kid, we had conservation projects. You'd have displays around the room here about conservation of birds, forests, insects. I guess we never had one on rocks. But everything else, there was a conservation project. And I think I did them all. Now we have, it's an ecology project. It's a sustainability project. I don't care what you call it. It's all good work. And I've worked with one group of college students at Western Michigan University, and they give me a lot of hope because, number one, they organized themselves at a 25,000 student university to do things that made sense. For example, they talked to the administration, and they put in the water dispensers. And they figured out how many semi-loads of these, not the flowers, the plastic bottles that didn't have to be taken off campus by putting in water dispensers, and then they gave every student, the university did, of course they charged people for it, a mug, a water mug. So by doing that, these students got it and started looking around for other things to do. So they contacted me and said, we'd like to get an apiary program going. And so they wrote a grant for $11,000 for 6 hives of bees. I like that.
That's a lot of supers.
And so we had a lot of fun. And now what's nice is that the sustainability part of this program is that every year, this year's seniors teach the juniors and sophomores how to do it. And they're doing it on their own. There is no faculty. Now, because the students organized this, the university in its wisdom said, oh, I guess we need a department of sustainability. So now you can get a PhD in sustainability from Western Michigan University, from professors of sustainability. All right, I'm probably having way too much fun here. But the point is, we want to have something that's going to go back to some really basic ideas. So, well, if you want to call this the new sustainability or the old conservation or whatever, the first thing we want to do is try to preserve some of the highly adapted genetic information we have. And here in Florida, I don't think we have any anymore. I think that we have been eroded by migratory beekeepers and flooded by African bees. However, there are people I've talked to, some of the geneticists, that say, when you go out into remote areas of any part of the country, you find genetic material that we haven't seen for 200 years. There are Spanish bees in California that may tell us that the Spaniards brought the bees in before the Jamestown. All right? So these are things that indicate to me that how much we know about the origin of our bees. We make a lot of assumptions, and we look at the big commercial operations that are packing up their semi-loads right now to take to California for almond pollination, and they're going to get their $225 per hive this year for pollination because the supply is short. Have you ever noticed that the news about the bees having problems always comes up in January and February? Think about it. So, I want you to keep in mind that we want to have stocks, and if you have access to a more remote area where you keep your bees, don't destroy all the genetic material you have because there may be something there that's worth looking at. Go ahead. Some of those survivor stocks, when the varroa mites came through, and that's our big problem. I think that one scientist in Ontario said that 90% of the bees that die in Ontario die because of varroa mites. And I can't disagree with him because, you know, it's a domino effect. What's the cause of death of that beehive? Is it starvation? Is it a virus? Well, why did they starve? Why did they get that virus? And it goes back to high levels of varroa mites. There are beekeepers right now in this room, in this country, that are looking at their colonies saying, but they were fine back in October. And they've died because of mite loads. The numbers have gone up. And there's a big complicated biology there, which you all have to just assume is working against you as a beekeeper and your colonies. The VSH stock, Varroa Sensitive Hygienic. This is a group of bees that were selected from around the country that survived the initial onslaught of varroa mites. And they selected the top 100 colonies. Now, you can look at it this way. They're the top 100, so they're the winners, right? That doesn't mean they're very good. Like the Native Americans, after the Spanish came through this part of the world, the Native Americans suffered miserably because of smallpox, venereal diseases, influenza, I don't know the other things that they died of. And a great book to read is 1491 about how amazing some of these tribes were in the Americas. And of course, not intentionally necessarily, they suffered. So we have to think that our bees are being in that same boat. So some of these stocks, these are survivor colonies, they're not so hot. Dr. John Harbaugh, who started this project in the early 90s, so we've got 25 years. John's my age, I'm 70. So John is retired from USDA, and instead of walking away from his beekeeping, he kept some of the stock with permission, and he's been trying to upgrade the beekeeper qualities. Honey production, ability to survive in Baton Rouge where he lives, and do all the things we want to have. So he's been working. So these are people who are going to help us with our beekeeping. Next one. We want to survive winter and dearth. You don't have much winter here, but you do have dearth periods. I've spent some time working with folks in the Caribbean, and it's amazing to me how sensitive the bees are to whether it's the dry period or the time just before the dry period that the bees can suffer. The populations go down, and so they're waiting for that rain to come. Get too much rain, so that's always so good. So you have to find that balance in the dirt. But when there is a lack of food for the bees, it doesn't take too long for a colony that has an adequate bee population to go through their reserves. And this is the one thing that we all have to remember. If you are a new beekeeper, I'd like to, everybody that's in their first 2 years of beekeeping, put their hand up. I thought so. I'm giving you permission to leave that honey on the hives. You can take it, you can come back and take a little sample from time to time, but I don't want you to get greedy. I want you to leave your bees. I haven't taken any honey off for 2 years now. And I'm kind of back to where I started. I'm a hobby beekeeper. I set up a little bee breeding program, and did I get it?
You did it.
All right, good. I just get too excited.
Behave yourself.
Behave myself. All right, now, so we want you to take a look at having as much food on your colonies. My major professor, who was trained in Canada, his professors taught him that you always had to have 3 full deep frames of honey on a colony at all times. And those of you who have 8 and 10 frame hives and just 1 deep, and we're talking about deep frames. So if you have mediums, and that's fine, but you have to say, oh, I'm going to need, you don't have enough room. Okay, and I understand that there's this mindset, oh, the bees are in Florida, they're going to have lots of food. And it's not true. I used to say that the honey flow lasted 2 weeks, and the rest of the time the bees were picking, and the robbing season starts. The bees are robbing each other out. You have to be very careful the way you approach your bees and beekeeping here. Next. Sharing your local genetic diversity. How many people in here are raising queens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a nose scratch. If you're going to have any success in keeping bees long term, you want to get a diverse group of bees in that have some local fitness, or fitness for local conditions, genetic fitness, that they can tolerate whatever it is they have to tolerate. And hopefully a little tolerance and resistance to varroa mites, small hive beetles, pesticides, whatever else you want to add on there. Next. How many of you know this guy, Bo Sterk, up in St. Augustine? Bo is an amazing guy because professionally he's an artist. And his passion is in helping beekeepers in places like Haiti after the earthquake. Well, actually before that. He's got boys that he's working with in Haiti. He says it takes 2.5 hours by rented vehicle to get up to the base camp, and then you have to hike for an hour. And the boys have to a 2-hour walk to meet him. He first met them when they were 11 and 12. And now they're 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there. And they're running around 25 colonies. These are log hives. Log hives. You chisel out and you burn out a log and you let the bees go in and put your swarm in there. This is pretty primitive. There's no movable frame. And you can't buy one of those hives, thank God. Unless it's from another person who keeps bees like that. You want to understand the importance of a couple of colonies of bees. These boys are now the wealthiest people in their village. They can buy a motor scooter. What's a motor scooter mean? They can go to school. They can go to college. They can get an education and bring it back to their community. Many of these people are going out and getting an education. I don't know what their degrees are in. I don't care. But they're being taught how to help people. So Bo is down there. He's not teaching these people to build Langstroth hives because there's no lumber. If you do build it, somebody's going to put it in their living room and use it as a table. I've seen that with many development programs in South America and in Africa and in Asia. The nicest equipment, the nicest things people have is their beehives. So let them keep bees in a primitive way so that they can be successful. And they they use a machete, cut out the end combs for the honey and squeeze it, and that's their honey crop. Any of you see that PBS documentary that was on a week or so ago about the Apis dorsata in India? Probably wasn't on here. It's an amazing story. Men taking the risk of, the mangrove swamps of South India, occupied by 3 dominant species: humans, mangrove, tigers, and Apis dorsata, the giant bee, the big bee. All right? And they can $60 off of one colony, and this is probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 pounds of honey, which puts these people ahead of the game in terms of their local economic structure. So when you bitch and moan about the cost of bee equipment and the lack of productivity, I want you to think about how it can be. But leave the honey on there. This is one of Bo's Tabar hives. This particular, I didn't throw the slide in. He keeps it in a half metal 30-gallon drum. Is there something wrong with that? It's a movable frame. It meets the letter of the law. Might get a little hot. Well, you just put a few more palm fronds on top. My first experience with overheating hives in LaBelle was the old timers. They'd take a couple of shovelfuls of white sand and put it right on the lid of their beehives. There was no inner cover. It was just simply a board. No fabric, nothing in there. Just a crude, simple hive. Is there anything wrong with that? Ultimately, no. It doesn't sell fancy bee equipment. And some people say, well, they could improve. But if they're making honey and they're providing bees right now, we need the bees. Next slide. So we're going to have new stocks. We're going to have stock improvement. Next. Stock improvement. Since European honeybees have been subjected to varroa we've got Marla Spivak and Gary Reuter in Minnesota, University of Minnesota, worked on the Minnesota hygienic And we've got other people. The Dr. Greg Hunt, Crispin Given, his technician. Crispin just got a university award for their work in developing the leg chewers. They've been called ankle biters, but we haven't been able to find any mites with ankles yet. All right, two different strategies. Hygienic works, and I'll show you a slide later, where the bees detect cells that have mites reproducing inside. And they destroy those cells, the contents of the cells. So they're killing their sisters. The leg chewers are killing the mites. They bite the mite. And there's some video clips out there that you want to look at because they actually go up and they grab a hold of the mite. And when you look at them, and you have a screen bottom board, the one reason why all beekeepers should have screen bottom boards is they can put paper underneath, sticky board, whatever you want to call it, and take a look at those mites underneath a microscope. You don't have a microscope? Find somebody who's got one. There are a lot of universities and colleges in this state. There's no reason why you can't go to the local high school biology teacher, a facility like this, and say, may I borrow that microscope? You can sit and watch me do it if you'd like. Or better yet, how would you like to help me? You want them to become involved in this because this is good science. This is good stuff. When you show them mites that are legless, that have fallen all the way down, that mite's worthless. It's dying of desiccation. And they'll also bite the carapace, that shell, like you bite the leg of the claw of a lobster. So these are the things that you want to have, but two different strategies. When Mother Nature gives us two answers, I say we got a solution. Because now we've got two things we can work with to help us with developing a sustainable approach. Next one. Well, you've got the varroa sensitive hygienic, and I mentioned earlier, the Russian queens. How many use Russians? One? Okay. I do. I've got a couple of Russian hives I got, well, it's almost 2 years ago. I like them. You think the bees are never going to grow? In the spring, they say, wait a minute. What's happening? And all of a sudden, they're swarming. They go from dead stop to full swarm before you realize what they're up to. It's an amazing strategy, and it's probably why they survive the mites. Because they keep a low population, and when they build up rapidly, then they create swarms. When you create swarms, you have a break in the brood cycle. All the things that the scientists are saying, well, you should have a break in the, blah, 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 blah. I'm beginning to be old enough and jaded enough to say, if it works, use it. The Russians are one that will work. Unfortunately, it doesn't work well for the guys that want to go to California for the almonds, because they get paid per bee. Next. There's some private programs out there. Joe Latshaw at Ohio. In Ohio. He's not at Ohio State University. He was a kid that his dad happened to be professor of poultry nutrition, and the poultry lab and the bee lab were side by side, and the bee lab was a whole lot more fun to hang out at the Rothenbuehler Bee Lab at Ohio State. So he raised his first queens when he was 12. He did his first inseminations probably soon thereafter. Now in his early 30s, he's breeding bees for the commercial industry. Not everybody likes them. But if the commercial guys will write checks with lots of zeros, what does he have to worry about, right? John Keefus, John's from Ohio. A couple of Buckeyes here. John made the mistake of going to a big conference, meeting a woman from southern France. He spoke no French, she spoke no English. They've been married now for 50 years. And sometimes you don't think they've ever learned any languages other than their own. John came up to the decision of watching people use all kinds of chemicals on their bees, and he lost a couple of friends who drove off the highway, and the official explanation, they were exhausted from working bees, but he kept thinking maybe they got exposed to something that affected them. So he developed, or he put the 007 approach to his colonies. He had about 1,000 colonies, 800 to 1,000. Live or let die. If they live, you graft from them. You produce drones from them. And you instrumentally inseminate the next generation. You keep doing this. 4 generations, 4 years, excuse me, not 4 generations, 4 years. He was back up to where he started. Now he's producing breeder queens that's selling for over €500 a piece. Euros worth what? $1.40?
$1.11.
Yeah, it's down.
$1.11.
$1.11. It's gone down. Okay, for the dollars.
$1.11, that's what it was today.
All right, no, buy.
It was $1.05 last week.
All right, okay. So, regardless of the exchange rate, that's a lot of money for a queen. I don't know what the weight of a queen is in gold, but someday I'm going to sit down and figure it out. It's getting.
People buy them for breeding purposes.
They absolutely do buy them for breeding purposes all over the world. He ships these queens to China, to Chile. He has a partner in Chile that's working with him to produce honey. Europeans are all over this. Can we bring them in here? Not directly. We have to get somebody in Canada to bring them in, and then we can get them in that way. Like we do the Buckfast.
They're ornery, aren't they?
The Buckfast?
From what I heard.
My experience with the Buckfast is they just weren't that vigorous. Though, but they've had a lot of problems. And sidebar here, Canada's had a lot of trouble with the seed treatments. And the areas where they're doing the mating for the Buckfast, natural mating for Buckfast queens, are the same areas where they have field corn. So if you lose that first couple of brood cycles in the spring, right at the peak season for buildup, it's pretty bad. You've got another issue here, and that's managing African or Africanized bees. How many of you say African? How many of you say Africanized? How many of you don't know what I'm talking about? All right. We won't get into that. See, there's people that if you say African, you don't think it's a hybrid. It's pure stuff. It's been changed. How much has it been changed? That's the question. The bees that we have in South Florida came to us how? Brazil? True. Most recently, how'd they get here? Probably right through your ports in Jacksonville, Lauderdale, Tampa, Miami.
When they first showed up, when they first started.
Yes, it is. And when you talk to your bee inspection people here, that's where they run the trap lines, looking for more swarms that are coming in. It's an indicator that it's hard to manage bees if you can't control everything in the world. So Africanized bees. How many of you consider Africanized bees or African bees an issue, a problem here where you are? Slow hands. Okay. Good. Glad to hear that. All right, next. I mean, I have people in Ohio that are bitching and moaning about the fact that there are some bees being brought into Ohio that have some African genes in the bees. So that's another issue. One of the key things that we need to be aware of is this idea of integrated pest management. And not all the things we do with our bees require chemicals. I was married to a lovely lady for 30 years, and anytime she sneezed, she had to have an antibiotic. She's still alive. But man, does she have issues. And I know a lot of people like that. We don't need drugs. Next slide, I think, is a close-up of this. So the Penn State pyramid, we emphasize cultural aspects. And these are where your resistance and even site selection, things that you can do with your bees that are somewhat passive, but reflect a decision. I am only going to keep bees that have resistance or tolerance. If everybody in this country did that, we'd be a lot further along. The next step up, we're going to have something mechanical or physical. Screen bottom boards are your best answer there. Traps and barriers. Next, you go up to biological, and this is where we fail. We have no ladybugs for the beehive. What's that mean? That's a Dewey Karen comment that we've got in our textbook. We don't have something that you can go out and tell beekeepers to, I want you to buy a quart of ladybugs and release it in your beehive. Except they're not ladybugs, they're something else. We haven't found that yet. There's nothing that goes into the beehive and just eats mites. There are things that go into the beehive and eat mites and bees, like wax moths. So we don't want to promote that. Going up, then we have the two chemical, the essential oils, powdered sugar, repellents, desiccants. And at the very tippy top, we've got the miticides, the big guns, which tend to be the ones that develop resistance the fastest. Resistance to, the mite develops resistance to that chemical. Where is our commercial industry? The tippy top. Why does David Hackenberg get to be the king or queen of colony collapse disorder twice in his career, having lost another 90% of his bees here in Florida? Because he medicates every chance he can. And he has the ability to go out and speak to people. And if you don't want to listen, you still have to hear him. So Dave's an exceptional person. His son is a little more logical. But you do have some real concerns here when you see the largest commercial queen or beekeepers in the country losing 50, 60, 70, 80% of their colonies and doing it more than once. Where are the people that I see being successful? They're the people that are dealing right here. I've had a commercial honey producer from the Dakotas to say, why aren't people using genetic solutions? This particular beekeeper had 1,500 colonies in the Dakotas, and he had not treated with anything for over 15 years. You run into these people. Some of you are these people. But you've done it by isolating technique, stock, and geography. That's my opinion. So these things work. Next. I think we're just going to go through these real quick here. So you got hygienics, the physical aspects of traps. Next.
You said you are not keeping any other hives than the resistant ones. How do you test them? How do you find out, and how long is it going to take?
How do I test them? Stay tuned.
Oh, okay. Good question.
All right. We don't have any biological controls for varroa. We do have the nematodes for small hive beetles. Anybody using nematodes? Check them out. Next. I'm not selling them. Chemicals. Next. Conventional miticides. Next. All right. A healthy hive. Next. We want to concentrate on some of those old things, like let's clean the kitchen or the operating room. Let's clean the apiary. Let's get rid of the old comb. Let's do the things that we know that are probably going to help us. It's not going to hurt you. It might cost you some money to replace foundation or comb. Next one. A lot of people are looking at feeding. I have a real problem with the advocates of feeding with all this witch's brew of stuff going in there. The essential oils and everything. Sometimes I can smell it in the honey they produce. And if I can smell that crap that you've treated your hives with in your honey, you've contaminated that honey, and you are working without ethics. End of discussion. You should shut it down. Next. Here in Florida, we got this lovely greening disease in oranges. There's always going to be something coming along. What are they going to replace that with? GMOs. You know it. They're doing it. They're doing it. They've got, I know of at least 3 different programs. Is there something wrong with GMOs? Okay. How about breeding in general? You have a problem with breeding? You know how we got the bush bean, a pea? I think it was the pea, not the bean. Exposed to, the seeds were exposed to heavy doses of radiation to get mutations. That's engineering, if you will, kind of random, but. So I think we have to take a solid look at what these GMOs mean and how they affect it. Do I want to have something with genes from Thuringiensis, you know what I'm trying to say, Bacillus thuringiensis? I prefer not. But if you can take a slice of a, what's a gene that one is, a banana? I eat bananas. And put it into oranges, I eat oranges. And if my oranges don't taste like bananas, I'm okay. So we have to look at the strategy that people are using and not being so arbitrary about this. I'll get off that soapbox. Sampling. Answer your question. Next slide. You're going to go in there and understand some biology. This is the most complicated slide I have in here. This is from
That's from Karen's book, isn't it?
Dewey's book, yep. And we had an artist redraw this for us. Mites exist in 2 phases, varroa mites. The larval phase in the cells, that's where the varroa sensitive hygienic, you're going to clean these out. You have the mites that are going to come in here and they're going to reproduce. And in worker bee, you get 1 or 2 females. Out of every female that goes in, you get 1 or 2 females coming out. With drone brood, you get up to 5 mites coming out. Ouch. In a couple of generations, you're in big trouble. So that's the larval stage. That's where you want the varroa sensitive hygienic. On the adult bees, you got mites on there. These are the phoretic mites, the feeding mites, the vampire mites, if that wakes you up. And they're feeding between the sclerites in the abdomen. They're getting a good meal of the hemolymph of the bee. And during that process, what are they doing? Oh, if we only knew. Like a mosquito, does it put things in? Yep. Or does it just open up the hole so they can walk in the open door, the wound? So these are things that we need to, figure out. But the point is, heavy mite loads, once in those bees, that they can be maintained. So those 2 aspects are where you're at it. Now, you can go in and you can sample bees on the brood comb, because that's where the mites are going to be, right? Mites aren't going to go up to the honey super, because that's not where the brood is. Next slide. You can put half a cup of bees into a jar. You see the lid here, it's got hardware cloth on it. So check some bees, you scoop them up off the frames. If you get the queen in there, it's okay, because we're going to use powdered sugar. If you use alcohol or something else, probably a little more effective, but also a little more deadly. So the powdered sugar, I like this. You're going to do this once a month. Here in Florida, you can do it 12 months a year. You have my permission, and I hope you do. And you're going to watch your mite levels. And you're going to get about 200 bees in there. Is it 200 or 300 in half a cup? Somebody help me here. 300. 300. So you're going to shake these bees. You're going to add some powdered sugar. You're going to get these mites to fall off or leave. We can't even agree on why they get off the body of the bee. Is it too hot? Or is there too much sugar in the way? Or is there too much hot sugar? Whatever. All right. And you shake these out, and I let it sit and shake it again. We've done this with a number of workshops in New York, and it's a really amazing thing to look at this stuff. Now, I can't see the mites very well, so what do? A little squirt bottle with hot water in it. Next. You liquefy that sugar, and now you can count the mites. Does this colony have a mite problem? Not a big one, but it's growing. This was in June. Does this colony have a mite problem? Yes, it's going to have one. Colonies the same weekend we sampled had 42 mites. Same sampling technique. So you can now use this system to do what? Track month by month, and also look at Varroa sensitive hygienic, buckfast, Russian, ankle biters, whatever you want, and come up with some sort of management plan to deal with this. And by the way, the scientist statistician in me says every colony has to be sampled twice. So you take an average. Because you can get some spurious data from time to time that you can't explain. All right, next. I took this picture. My kid brother and Mr. Stodges. How did I get into bees? I'm going to bore you with that. I apparently had more beekeeping family members than I realized. And it's probably more the fact that I come from a family that comes from a farming background. The bees were like chickens and turkeys and everything else. You had them. Mr. Stodges left Latvia. He and his family survived the Nazis, and then after 5 years, they got away from the communists. They set up 12 hives of bees across the street, and they loved their bees loved our apple trees, and they'd swarm. So there's one of his swarms, and he was very much old school. Your tree, our bees. So we had, not yet, we had the equipment. It was always empty because this is an apple orchard. This is the 50s. What are we doing? We're reading the book from Michigan State University that says every 3 days you put an insecticide on there. Or every 5 days, different times of the season. You got codling moth and apple maggot. Man, I blame all kinds of things wrong with my brothers that. All right? And probably with some justification. Did we wash any? Yeah, we did. So we're putting in that swarm of bees. Mr. Stodges didn't teach us much, but we had a neighbor, my second father, was a self-appointed naturalist, taught me a lot about birds, trees, and insects. I had an uncle. He helped us. Next slide. So we had these people that were there. So in my short time working with beekeeping, one of the things that I like to see people do is have more than one hive of bees. I'm saying 4 or more. I started out with the Bee Central saying 2 or more. Now I'm not going to go to 4 or more. For a couple of reasons. One, I want you to be serious about your beekeeping. So if you can spend the money to buy 4 hives of bees, You're not going to buy an extractor, which you don't need the first year, because you're going to leave the honey on the bees, and you're going to be more dedicated to those bees rather than perform the ritual of drive-by beekeeping, where you drive by the bee supply dealer, pick up an empty box, or a box filled with empty, a bunch of sticks. You have to put them together, and then you drive back and you get packages or nukes and you throw those bees in there, or catch a swarm. I grew up as a drive-by beekeeper. Our bees came from Sears and Roebuck. And those bees came from Harvey York, who I then had the opportunity to work with, as in part of our bee breeding program. And he showed me the orders from Sears and Ward's. He had one of those 2-hole binders with the orders. And, it'd start out in this time of year about 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches. It was about 3 feet. And the big customers, his customers, got their bees first. So on average, those orders were filled sometime in June. That might not be when people want their bees, in both packages and queens. So we deal with a lot of issues that are going on here. What else have I got up here? Next. I'm kind of down on packages. Jim Haskell, PhD ag economist. Nothing to do with the fact that he's also a hobby beekeeper, retired. Outside of Washington, D.C. in the Beltway, in the Northern Virginia Beekeepers Association. And he's got all the Virginia beekeepers reporting to him about their success with different combinations. Where are the bees from and where are the queens from? And on average, if you get Georgia bees, packages, and Georgia queens, 1 colony out of 5 survives to be a year old. Oh, that sounds like Tom Seeley's data. But if you get local Virginia bees with Virginia queens, you get an 80% success rate. So they set up this mentoring program, and that's where Pat, his wife, came in, because she helped their club like this say, okay, every one of you is going to work with somebody, and that somebody is going to get a hive of bees out of you. If you're an established beekeeper, you've had bees for at least a year. Oh, okay. There are a lot of people out there that don't want to do this mentoring thing. And I know I don't like people calling me at 11 o'clock at night. I can be really short. All right? I answer every email I get, but sometimes it's yes, no, I don't know. There are a lot of times I don't know. And I have a business partner now, and he likes to go on. He doesn't know anything about bees. He gives them a long detail about all the things that he's read. I say, Rob, you don't know. Don't send that. All right, next. Package bees, I think, are one of the answers. That's snow. Just we haven't had much of it in the north this year. Next. So we have a bunch of books, Making Increased Colonies. We really like the idea that all of you are going to make up increase, nukes, splits, walk-away splits. What else do you call them here? Nukes, nooks. Next. Our beginner book on Bee Essentials, that's where I talk about 2.5 hives. I want every new beekeeper to start out with 2 hives, and their first year make their first nuke. You can do it. It's not hard. If you've got the right mentor. Next. Groups, having educational programs where you can work as a group. Group yards, you got one here, right? Yep. I think this is a great idea. And the more you can do, you can have identical colonies by setup, side by side, and they're doing completely different things. Next. Next. Sustainable apiaries. I almost hate to bring this up. We got to start working on the drone side. We got to start thinking about how we're going to mate our bees. Are we going to have mating yards like the apiary here that are set up specifically for mating? It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, but you can do it. Next. So you take a look at the geography around here. Thank you, sir. That's a lot of real estate. And I'm sure I don't have everybody on here that's in this room, right? So it indicates just how incredibly complicated. But we see a few clubs that do have mating yards that they've set up, and they're trying to saturate them with the desired stock. What do you do for breeders? Well, you could take John Harbaugh's Varroa sensitive hygienic and mate it to Purdue's ankle biters and rotate them every other year. That's what we were doing over here in LaBelle back in the 70s. It was called the crisscross program. Everything, new is, everything old is new again, right? Next.
Is that Starling?
Yeah. Yeah, this wouldn't be the Starline. What happened to Starline? They had no resistance to mites.
What happened to me?
What?
That's what happened to me.
Yeah, it happened to a lot of people. You may have to do all of your work while the commercial beekeepers are out of the state probably during the summer. I don't know how you're going to do that. I don't have an answer. Next. That's Florida. No, that's Hawaii. No, where is that? That's Hawaii. You can do the same thing here. As a club, that's a commercial operation.
What are
Those are mating nukes.
Hives.
They're four
Four ways?
ways, yeah. I wouldn't do this here in Florida. You know why? Small hive beetles. They'll eat those for lunch.
started?
So probably,
Never done it. I think it's started.
ma'am, I'm sorry you've been here tonight. You need to find. Do you have a bee school here?
We have beekeepers course, we have colleges, all kinds.
There's a bee college that goes on here, University of Florida. These two books, not this one, this one and the Bee Essentials, are being used by a lot of people for their classes. As soon as I walked out the door, the orders came in. I'm suggesting this is a business plan. That I be somewhere else and let the guys do the work. You need to find somebody local to work with. You want to have time to work with somebody for a period of time. I don't like the idea of, can I have that chair? I don't have a new knee anymore. It's about four months old, but a knee replacement. It's telling me, sit down. So if you're going to have a new beekeeper, if you are a new beekeeper, you're a wannabe beekeeper. You're going to spend some time visiting with folks in here, going out at the apiary for the meetings. You'll probably be in there every month now from the rest of the season as the day length increases. So you're able to do some things that will benefit you and get to see if you want to be in bees. The biggest mistake I see are people that don't want to admit that they're really rotten at beekeeping. Because they think, oh, I can't let the bees down. The world will collapse if I can't keep bees. All right. I want you to find somebody and work with them. I want you to read some of these books. And there are other books out there, believe it or not. However, I'll just say that I don't write for dummies or idiots. All right. That's a reference to Beekeepers for Dummies. Yes?
What do you consider old comb in college? How many seasons?
How many seasons for Old Comb? There are people that are now calling Old Comb anything over 2 years old. I'm running around 5 years in mine, and I've got to do a serious cull out this spring. Get rid of some of the really old comb. We haven't had some of the problems that migratory beekeepers have going into areas where they have a lot of exposure to pesticides. So I think that's one thing that you've got. But in suburbia, you have another set of problems. You have urban landscape. You have golf courses. There are some people that are out there yelling and screaming about golf courses using, both the neonics and also the mosquito controls that are larvicides that happen to be a growth regulator. And this gets in the water, or it's put in the water. What happens with the bee is exposed to growth regulators. I've asked, no one knows. It's pretty much this, I don't want to get into politics tonight because we're getting plenty of it, but I will say this, that our government is here to make sure that people don't die. Beyond that, they don't care about bees. They're not charged with testing to see if our bees will survive. They just want to make sure you'll survive in somewhat normal state. So I have real concerns about all this. Okay. Let's get a better question. Yes, sir.
Out of curiosity, I mean, as I'm a backyard beekeeper, but a lot of backyard beekeepers sort of target the commercial people to be critical about using miticides and things like that. And is there a practical strategy, though, for a commercial beekeeper to transition without a substantial loss of their income or of their hives to a more natural thing? Because, I mean, if you end up trying to transition, you lose 90% of your hives. I can see that's a huge deterrent to a commercial beekeeper trying to transition.
Well, after 27, 28 years, there are stocks out there and there are people doing it. So the person who has a commercial operation should do the very same thing that new beekeeper should do, is go visit people that are doing it. You know, anybody that's got a new technique that's working, or an old technique is still working, we should do the research and find out why and how, and start putting some of that in our own operation.
Tell us more about Hopkins Miles, the nematodes.
Tell you more about the nematodes. I've never used them. Full disclosure, my friends, the same couple in Virginia, Jim and Pat, they've promoted a lot of people to use them. You put them into a water solution and pour it around the hives. And then the beetle larvae go into the soil around the hives, and then they're killed.
Beneficial nematodes.
Beneficial nematodes, that's right.
You YouTube it, or you can go online and you can find it.
Yeah, I think it's something that every club in the southern states should have as a program. And you might even set up some of the nematodes here. I don't know what it costs to do it per hive. Can't be that terrible, cost-wise. Yes.
Something was just recently placed on Facebook that in Russia, long before pesticides, they were using walnut leaves for some solution that came from walnut leaves to help keep these problems at bay. Have you heard anything about it?
Oh, she's saying that there's something that's been on the internet that's saying that walnut leaves in Russia, Russian walnut leaves, are being used to control something. Okay, there are lots of things. Where we're using oxalic acid right now. Where do you find oxalic acid in nature? Rhubarb. Does that mean it's safe? Does that mean you can go out there and use oxalic acid without getting some information about it? Does it mean it's going to work? Well, a lot of people say it does. I'm just going to leave it that my mother made the best rhubarb pie of anybody I've ever met. Unfortunately, yes.
A couple of questions I got. Where, I'm not privy to the information that you have at the university level, but how would a guy go about getting some Russian stock? How's that possible?
There are people that are advertising in the journals. You call them up and say, hey, how many can you send me?
Okay, well, I had a digital subscription at my beautiful shop. Next thing, a number of people are saying that they'll need one good source of new genetic stock is from Australia and from New Zealand. I don't know about that.
Somebody's saying there's good stock from New Zealand and Australia. You can't bring them in.
Okay, that's,
It's illegal, and there are two reasons why. One is another mite, Trophoelaps clary, which if you thought Varroa was bad, this is more badder. And Apis cerana, another species of honeybee, which, you know, when I was young and stupid, I used to think, well, we should just bring in this Apis cerana. Here's a bee that you can put into a hive. It doesn't produce honey, and it doesn't cause any problems. That's what we need in this country, right? But it's also potentially a vector for all these new diseases and mites.
back in the day, I went to visit an apiary out in Hawaii, called Queens, when I was over there. And I thought about bringing some of that in. Is that, I know Hawaii's got a
Hawaii, you can bring all the queens out of Hawaii you want. You just can't take them in there.
yeah, you got to pass a written test on the airplane saying you're not bringing anything in.
Yeah.
What's your opinion, you got an opinion on the genetic stock there? Would that be something to mess with?
Kona Queens did not do good with Varroa.
Well, I think that you have to realize that until 4 years ago, the mites weren't in Hawaii, and they're still not on all the islands. They are on the big island where Kona is. But basically what Gus has done, Gus Rouse, I guess he just sold that business. He's retiring, and the reality is that they don't like Varroa-sensitive hygienic stock. They don't like the bees because they're not their bees. They're not what they're used to. And the USDA actually had a program with Tom Glenn where they flew Tom over with semen. It is illegal to bring the semen in under permit. And they did an instrumental insemination, produced daughters from that. The daughters then are at 75%, and the daughters of those of 3 generations are at 75%. Well, yeah, it gets up to 87.5%. And according to the government, that's good enough. So that's out there. That's in Hawaii now. What you don't realize is a lot of the queens you buy from California queen producers are Hawaiian in origin. It's like going to the supermarket and buying a lot of things. There's no disclosure about where it's from. You could ask and see what they say. Do I think there's anything wrong with Hawaiian queens? Not that I have any information on. They look good. I know people have been using them for 30, 40 years to make up their nukes every spring in the Northeast, and they've had very good luck with them. Other than South Florida, that's the only other place in the country you can get queens this time of year.
In your opinion, if I was to order Russian queens from Georgia, would you think that I would have a 1 in 5 rate over 1 year?
I don't know what he's asking if I'd get a 1 in 5 rate.
Well,
I think you're going to have to find out for yourself. I bought 4 Russian queens from a new Russian cooperator in Massachusetts. They were produced by a Russian breeding partner in Arkansas. 2 of the 4 are still alive a year and a half later. So that says a lot to me. And I've done nothing to them. I mean, talk about leave them alone beekeeping. They seem to do well with that strategy. Have they swarmed? Oh God, yes. All the time. If you look at them funny, they're out. But they're still there. The colonies are still alive and well. Okay.
How do you make money with the colony?
You what?
How do you make money with the colony?
How do they make money? I didn't say they made money. They make swarms. All right. I'm going to cut it off there. Thank you all. You've been a great group and appreciate it.